Have you ever, like, hovered your finger over the share button on a social media post and just, momentarily wondered if that single tiny click could somehow break the
Oh,
internet?
absolutely.
Or, I mean, in more extreme scenarios, if that one casual tap could actually land you in a prison cell.
Right. It's a uniquely modern anxiety, I think.
Mm.
We spend our entire lives in this hyper-connected digital ocean, yet we have almost no intuitive sense of, how much power, or really how incredibly little power one single action actually holds in the grand scheme of things.
Exactly. And well, welcome to the deep dive because today's mission is to explore that exact anxiety, and we're doing it by looking at a truly fascinating stack of documents.
Yeah, this stack is incredible.
It really is. We have a collection of analytical outputs from 6 of the most powerful AI language models in the world right now. So we are talking ChatGPT, DeepSeek, Gemini, Copilot, Grok, and Quinn.
All the heavy hitters.
All of them. And the prompt they were given was to analyze this very specific legal event known as the Chen Jingguan case.
And the approach these AIs took was just entirely unexpected. I mean, they didn't just look at the legal statutes, right?
Right. They went way beyond that.
They brought in this incredibly heavy scientific machinery, like from physics to advanced network theory, to essentially stress test the underlying logic of human behavior and legal blame.
It's mind-blowing. But before we get into the actual math they use, I do need to put a quick disclaimer out there. Because the Chen Jingguan case, it involves a Chinese scholar who was actually jailed for, quote, picking quarrels and provoking trouble, end quote.
Which is a very specific legal charge there.
Right, and it happened after he forwarded some politically sensitive posts online. So I want to make it explicitly clear to you, the listener, right up front, we are not taking political sides here.
Not at all.
We are not endorsing the viewpoints of the original post, and we aren't, validating the court either. Our mission today is just to impartially report on how these advanced AI models took the source material and basically put court's legal logic through the absolute meat grinder of complex mathematics and systems philosophy.
Exactly. We are really dissecting the architecture of cause and effect itself. The politics are honestly just the background setting here. The real story is about how human systems try and often completely fail to understand causality.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand why every single one of these 6 AI models independently flag the court's logic as fundamentally flawed, we first have to understand the massive mismatch in how the two sides view the very concept of cause and effect.
Yeah, there's a huge gap there.
Right. So the court in this case, they laid out a very mechanical, straightforward argument. Their logic was essentially, A directly leads to B.
Simple as that.
Yeah. They claimed that Chen forwarding a post equated to spreading false information and that this single action directly caused a severe public disorder.
What's fascinating here is how the judicial system was employing this strictly Newtonian worldview.
Newtonian, like Isaac Newton.
Yeah, exactly. If you think back to classical Newtonian physics, the universe is treated like this giant predictable clockwork machine, or, like a game of billiards.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Right, so if you hit a billiard ball with a cue, it travels in a straight line and hits another ball. The causality is totally visible, it's linear, and it's proportional to how hard you hit it.
Makes total sense.
And the court treated human society exactly like that billiard table. They assumed that one bad strike, meaning one bad post, has a direct, measurable trajectory that just, shatters the whole game. But the AIs point out a really glaring issue here.
Which is?
Human society is not a simple machine. It is what scientists call a complex adaptive system.
Okay, but I have to push back a little here, though.
Sure, go for it.
Think about the world we live in today. Isn't it true that in a highly connected digital ecosystem, a single post actually can cause a riot? I mean, we've all seen viral misinformation cause real-world runs on banks or panic buying at grocery stores.
Yeah, the toilet paper panics.
Exactly. So the court isn't entirely crazy to worry about a single spark, right?
Well, the worry is definitely real, but the attribution of the causality is entirely wrong. In a complex adaptive system, cause and effect are nonlinear. They're tangled up in these massive webs of feedback loops.
So it's not just ball A hitting ball B.
Not even close. Blaming a single input for a massive output in a complex system, it completely isolates one variable and just ignores the entire surrounding ecosystem that actually allowed that variable to do anything at all.
So, applying the court's logic, it feels a bit like blaming a single falling leaf for causing a massive forest fire.
Yes, that is a great way to visualize it.
You end up putting the leaf on trial while completely ignoring, how bone dry the forest was, how high the winds were blowing, or who actually left the campfire burning in the first place.
Exactly. You cannot understand the fire by putting the leaf under a microscope. So if society isn't a simple billiard table where one ball hits another, we have to ask, well, how does information actually flow?
Right.
And this brings us to the structure of the internet itself. The AIs analyzed Chen's actions using the science of network topology.
Which sounds very intimidating.
It does, but they specifically pointed out that our social networks are what's known as scale-free networks.
Okay, I've heard that term before, but for those of us who aren't like network scientists, what does a scale-free network actually look like?
Well, think about a traditional grid, like a
Yeah.
checkerboard, or maybe the highway system in a very heavily planned city where every intersection connects to roughly the same number of roads.
Okay.
That is a uniform network. But in the late 1990s, researchers discovered that real-world networks, like the internet or human social circles, they do not grow easily like that. They follow a power law distribution.
Meaning what, practically?
It means you end up with a structure where the vast, overwhelming majority of people are what we call edge nodes, meaning they sit on the very periphery of the network with almost no connections.
Just kind of hanging out on the fringes?
Yeah. Meanwhile, a microscopic minority of users become massive hub nodes.
Oh, like mega influencers.
Exactly. The giant media accounts with millions of followers, the central distribution points.
So looking at the data the AI models pulled on Chen's specific case, he was like the ultimate edge node.
Oh, absolutely.
The sources say he had fewer than 100 followers, and most of those were totally inactive, what they called zombie accounts. And his total lifetime forwards over his whole account history were under 100.
Yeah, he wasn't a hub. He was practically a ghost.
Literally a ghost.
And in a scale-free network, the entire macrostructure is dictated by those massive hubs. The millions of edge nodes, like Chen, they just dangle off the extreme outer limits of the web.
Okay, I get that he's on the edge, but let me try to play devil's advocate again here.
Always a good idea.
Let's use a traffic analogy. Say the hubs are the massive superhighways, and Chen is just a guy living in a tiny, remote cul-de-sac.
Okay, tracking.
Even if he's in a cul-de-sac, what if he backs out of his driveway, hits another car, blocks the local road, and then that traffic slowly trickles out until it jams up the superhighway?
It's a logical thought.
Doesn't that mean an edge node can still logically crash the whole network?
It is a very intuitive human assumption to make, definitely. But the underlying mathematics of networks prove that it actually doesn't work that way.
Wait, really? It mathematically can't?
Right. The AI has pulled in a principle of network robustness, specifically Cohen and Haviland's threshold formula. And without, throwing a chalkboard of algebra at the listener, there's a concept regarding the mathematical variance in these networks.
Try to keep it simple for me.
I will. In a normal bell curve, things hover around an average, right, like human height. Most people are somewhat close to average.
Right.
But in a scale-free network, the variance is so wildly extreme because one hub might have 1 billion connections while 1 million normal people have 0, that the whole concept of a mathematical average breaks down entirely. The second moment of the degree distribution basically diverges to infinity.
Okay, alphabet soup aside, what does that extreme variance actually mean for our guy in the cul-de-sac?
It means that the network is structurally immune to random noise at the edges. Because the massive superhighways are absorbing and directing like 99.9% of the traffic, a jam in one tiny cul-de-sac literally does not register mathematically on the macrostructure.
Oh, wow. So it just gets absorbed.
Exactly. You cannot disrupt a network by removing or activating a random edge node when the edge nodes do not hold the network together in the first place. The system's sheer structural design dampens his action almost immediately.
Okay, so structurally, Chen is trapped in his digital cul-de-sac. He doesn't have the reach to cause a nationwide traffic jam. But what if we look at the post itself?
The content.
Right. What if the information he forwarded is just incredibly contagious? That moves us away from looking at the structure of the network and into the dynamics of how things go viral, right?
That is exactly where the AI models shifted their analysis, yeah.
Right.
To measure virality, they utilized something called the Galton-Watson branching process.
Branching process, okay.
It is the exact same statistical framework used in epidemiology to track how a physical virus spreads through a population. To create a cascade, or what we would call going viral, the average number of new people infected by each person has to be greater than 1.
Ah, like the reproduction number.
Exactly. In epidemiology, you might hear this called R0 or R0.
Right, like we heard constantly during COVID. If one sick person infects 2 people and they infect 4, the thing grows.
Yes, exponential growth.
But if one person infects like 0.5 people on average, the virus just hits a dead end and dies out.
And here is where the AIs applied that mathematical ruthlessness to the court's logic.
Oh.
They looked at Chen's specific parameters.
His actual account stat.
Yes. His interaction rate was near absolute 0, and the content he was sharing was politically sensitive, which means the platform algorithms were already actively suppressing it.
So they're already throttling him.
Heavily. Based on that, the AIs estimated his reproduction number was somewhere around 0.1, or potentially even as low as 0.01.
Wait, they actually calculated the mathematical expectation of his specific post.
They did. And at a reproduction number of 0.1, the mathematical expectation of his cascade size was roughly 1.11.
So let me just translate that for the listener really quick. He forwards the post, and statistically speaking, 1/10 of a single person engages with it.
Yep.
He shouts his message, and the mathematical result is that basically nobody hears it. That is not inciting a riot. That is literally just shouting into a void.
The terminology the AIs use to describe this is really powerful. They state that his action was in a, quote, deep subcritical state.
Deep subcritical.
Right. When your reproduction number is that far below 1, the probability of the cascade going extinct approaches 100%. The chain reaction breaks almost instantly.
Wow.
So the AIs concluded that it is mathematically, scientifically impossible for his action alone to trigger macro-level public disorder. It is a statistical 0.
Okay, so we have network topology proving he doesn't have the structural reach, and we have epidemiological branching math proving the post doesn't have the momentum.
Right.
But if the math objectively proves that a guy like Chen couldn't possibly cause an avalanche of public disorder, why did a riot actually happen? What does cause a society to experience severe disorder?
To answer that, the AIs introduced a concept from physics called self-organized criticality.
Self-organized criticality.
Yeah. A physicist named Per Bank pioneered this, and he used a really brilliant, tangible analogy. A sand pile.
Okay, paint the picture for me.
Imagine you are slowly dropping grains of sand one by one onto a flat table. At first, you just get a harmless little mound, but as you keep adding sand, the sides get steeper and steeper. Eventually, the pile reaches a critical state where the slope is as steep as it can possibly be without collapsing.
Right, and once the pile is in that hyperfragile state, dropping just one single microscopic grain of sand onto the pile can trigger a massive avalanche that wipes out the entire side of the structure.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, complex systems, whether they are economies, corporate hierarchies, or human societies, they naturally evolve toward this critical state over time.
So they become unstable just by existing and growing.
Yes. So a societal avalanche, like a riot or a massive public breakdown, it doesn't happen because the final grain of sand was particularly heavy or malicious. The true scientific cause of the avalanche is the accumulated systemic tension.
The pile itself.
Right. It is the undeniable fact that the sand pile was already in a supercritical state, carrying far too much unresolved energy, just waiting for the slightest breeze.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because looking at what the AIs pointed out, the court seems to have walked backward into a massive, embarrassing logical trap here.
Oh, big time.
The court aggressively insisted that Chen's single tiny post did cause severe public disorder. But if the court insists that is an objective fact, they are scientifically admitting that their own society was already an incredibly fragile, supercritical sand pile teetering on the absolute brink of total collapse.
It is a stunning paradox.
Yeah.
I mean, by legally blaming an edge node, the authorities are unwittingly indicting their entire system.
Wow. Yes.
Because if a societal system is healthy, balanced, and robust, a single grain of sand does absolutely nothing. It just rests on the pile. If one random guy with 100 followers can cause a nationwide avalanche, well, your system was already failing long before he picked up his phone.
Oh my God, they completely trapped themselves. By trying to show strength, they mathematically prove their own ultimate fragility. And in that scenario of a supercritical society, the true systemic risk doesn't come from edge nodes like Chen, right? It comes from the high-impact hubs. The authorities, the policymakers, the institutions, they are the ones who spent years pouring sand into an unstable pile in the first place.
The hubs create the conditions. The edge node simply reveals them.
Which raises the ultimate question for me. If Chen is just a mathematically harmless grain of sand, Why would a massive, powerful judicial system react with such intense aggression?
Well, that's the million-dollar question.
Right. Why go to the trouble of utilizing the full force of the law to crush someone who the math proves is functionally invisible?
This is where the AI analyses shifted out of pure physics and into systems philosophy, citing thinkers like von Bertalanffy and Luhmann.
Okay, what does systems philosophy tell us?
Well, any healthy, functioning, complex system requires something called negative feedback to survive.
Okay, let's explore negative feedback, because the word negative makes it sound like a bad thing, but it's actually the most vital mechanism in nature.
Completely vital, yeah.
I like to think of it like the thermostat in your living room. If the house gets way too hot, the thermometer registers that uncomfortable heat and sends a negative feedback signal to the air conditioning unit.
Right.
The AC kicks on, cools things down, and restores a comfortable balance.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize it. In a human society, negative feedback takes the form of public complaints, dissenting opinions, whistleblowers, or just open debate.
The noise of a society.
Yes. Is the raw data the system absolutely needs to realize things are getting too hot, so it can self-correct, adapt, and survive in a rapidly changing environment.
So by tracking down and severely punishing edge nodes just for sharing information, the judicial system is acting exactly like a broken thermostat.
Exactly.
It's getting unbearably hot in the house, but instead of turning on the AC to fix the underlying problem, the system just takes a hammer and smashes the thermometer.
And when you smash the thermometer, you completely blind the system to reality. The AI models actually pulled in a concept from computer science to back this up, known as the CAP theorem.
I am definitely not a computer scientist, so you are going to have to translate that one for me.
Sure. At a high conceptual level, the CAP theorem addresses the limitations of distributed data networks. It essentially proves that in any massive distributed system, absolute, static, perfect order is a mathematical illusion.
You literally can't have it.
You cannot have perfect consistency everywhere all at once without breaking the system's ability to function. There will always be localized noise, delays, discrepancies, and disagreements. In a complex system, a certain amount of disorder is actually a feature of resilience, not a bug to be eradicated.
But looking at the source documents, the court clearly does not see it that way. They view any noise, any dissent, any messiness at the edges as a literal threat to their vision of perfect static order.
And that pursuit of static order is a fatal flaw in systems philosophy. When a system suppresses negative feedback, when it aggressively smashes the thermometer, it creates a terrifying dynamic called a positive feedback loop.
Positive feedback being the dangerous one in this context.
Highly dangerous, yes.
Like when a microphone gets too close to a speaker at a concert and it catches its own output, creating that deafening screeching loop that just gets louder and louder until it blows the amp. Amplification of the wrong signal.
That's exactly it. By trying to forcibly silence the minor, everyday noise of a society, the system paradoxically amplifies fear, rigidity, and systemic distrust. In the language of thermodynamics, they are rapidly increasing the system's entropy.
So they're killing the system to save it.
Yeah, they are taking a society that should be a self-organizing, living, breathing entity capable of adapting to challenges and forcing it into a closed, rigid state. And a core law of physics is that a closed system without feedback inevitably exhausts its energy and trends toward collapse.
Wow. So what does this all mean? We started this deep dive looking at a guy who just hit forward on his phone and ended up in a jail cell. But by reading through these 6 AI analyses of the Chen Jingyuan case, we have uncovered this profound and honestly terrifying collision of paradigms. We're watching a judicial system desperately trying to apply simplistic, linear 19th century control mechanisms like hitting a billiard ball with a cue to a 21st century, highly nonlinear, complex adaptive network.
And it just doesn't work. The math literally proves it cannot work.
Why?
It really forces us to examine our own environments. Because if you think about it, this isn't just a lesson about one obscure legal case. It is a profound reflection on how human beings fundamentally misattribute blame in modern society.
We do it all the time.
We do. When we see a massive corporate failure or a vicious social media pylon or a sudden political crisis, our biology hardwires us to point our fingers at the tiny trigger. We want to blame the single mid-level employee, the single controversial tweet, the single grain of sand.
Because it's easy. It's visible.
Exactly. But the physics of networks tell us we are looking in the completely wrong place. We are confusing the final grain of sand with the massive underlying systemic fragility that the powerful hubs built long before that post was ever shared.
It makes you wonder about the future of how we organize and govern ourselves as a species. And, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day.
It's a big one.
If human legal systems are structurally trapped in this outdated linear thinking, if our judges, our lawmakers, and our corporate leaders literally cannot comprehend or accurately model cause and effect in a digital world governed by scale-free networks and branching probabilities, how soon until we hit a breaking point?
Yeah.
How soon until we are forced to ask artificial intelligence, the very entities that do natively understand these complex mathematical models, to step in and actually design our laws for us?
It is an unavoidable question. As our society becomes too complex for the human brain to accurately map, we may just have to outsource our justice to the algorithms.
So the next time you are scrolling through your feed and you hover your finger over that share button, just remember, mathematically, you are not going to break the internet. But you might just be the grain of sand that tests the hidden fragility of the world around you. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.